Okay, so we're going to start now with our first keynote event. And if I were to ask, what's been the hot topic of the last year, I think everybody would put their hand up and say AI. Have we talked about anything else? So it's fantastic to be kicking off with a talk that is about neoliberalism, collegiality, authenticity. And it is a discursive keynote about generative AI. So we've got our three colleagues joining us. Donna Lanclos is an anthropologist who's been working with libraries and higher education since 2009. Donna writes, thinks and speaks about the nature of information, digital and physical spaces and higher education generally. Her work is relevant not just to libraries or universities, but to conversations about how we as a society make sure that people have opportunities to learn how to think critically, to practice those skills and to find their voices. Lawrie Phipps is senior research lead at JISC. His portfolio includes research into institutional digital practices, digital leadership, and issues impacting on digital experiences in education and digital transformation. And Richard Watermeyer is a sociologist, professor of HE and co-director of the Centre for Higher Education Transformations at the University of Bristol in the UK. His research is predominantly concerned with critical analyses of change and disruption in higher education, affecting the organisation and governance of universities and science, academic identity and research practice, and the public role and contribution of universities and scientists. So I'd like to hand over to our panel for the first keynote. Welcome. Thank you. Maybe we can. Thank you.
We're doing a bit of a relay for this talk, so we're going to getting up and going down. So I'm Donna Lanclos. Thank you so much to Linda and the committee and to Wendy for welcoming us. So yeah, we're going to be real cheerful to start off the day. And now I don't know how to advance the slide. There we go. I wanted to give you a little bit of context in addition to what Linda said about who we are and what we do. We are, as she said, I'm an anthropologist, and Lawrie is actually an environmental scientist by training, and Richard is in education as a field. And so we're bringing our areas of expertise together to think about this thing that everybody is insisting that we think about. Generative AI tools, large language models, machine learning, natural language processing, all of these things get glossed as AI, and we're going to try in this talk to very much not talk about it in terms of AI, because that's not what those things are, first of all. We are not ourselves programmers, and we would refer you to computer scientists such as Abebe Berhane, Emily Bender, Margaret Mitchell, Timnit Gebru for a deeper understanding of what LLM tools do and what they don't do, and what is and is not AI. Our research focuses on the behaviors of academics, and all of us who are confronted with these tools in the context of these practices in universities. We're here to talk about what people's assumptions about LLMs and generative AI tools can tell us about academic values. We would like to start with a disclaimer. While none of our work was developed using ChatGPT or other large language models, their existence is the subject of our research, and we've benefited in carrying out that work. We are invited to speak. We have articles out. This is something that we acknowledge. We would like to acknowledge that tools like ChatGPT do not respect the individual rights of authors and artists, ignore concerns over copyright and intellectual property in the training of systems. Additionally, we acknowledge that some of the systems are trained in part through the exploitation of precarious workers in the global south. So we'd just like to keep that in mind as we go forward. Lawrie is going to talk us through very briefly the survey that we did, and then I will get back up on the podium at some point.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. Just very briefly, our work is based on a survey, a qualitative survey that we put out last year. We had 428 participants, 284 of them identified as academic. Could talk a lot about all of the demographics about them, but I think the most important thing is that there is a broad base. The other thing I'd say is that whilst around about half of the people that were engaged with the survey said that they engaged with GAI, the other half said they didn't, but 70% and 83% acknowledged that it was impacting on their work, or they anticipated that it would impact on their work in the future. So even those people that aren't actually engaged with the tools are saying, yes, this is going to be big in my future, whether I like it or not. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. We focused on 4 open-ended questions. What are you using them for? How are they changing how you work? How are they not changing how you work? And why would you be using it more or less in the future? And we've sort of gone through that. We've sort of done lots of analysis so far. I think it's fair to say, looking at my colleagues, that our first papers that we've published on this are preliminary, and that we are still going through more data. We still have another survey out, a qualitative survey again, not a tick box exercise. We're actually collecting rich data through free text, and we're also doing interviews, and we are anticipating publishing more on the behaviours of academics later in the year. And I'd like to now hand over to Richard, who's going to cover the landscape of academia.
Thanks, Lawrie. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here with you. I'm unapologetically a critical sociologist of higher education. So you'll excuse the bent that I take here in terms of characterizing what to many of you will resonate if we think about the context to which these tools are inserting themselves into when we think of higher education in a broad global landscape. And on the global, it's worth adding to what Lawrie was saying, that some of the research we're doing is international in its scope. So whilst a lot of the data that we're presenting here is based on UK-based survey, we're doing similar kinds of work in the context of Singapore, South Africa, and in broader international terrains. So, okay, doomsday scenario, but this is probably going to be familiar to many of you. And this, again, is based upon qualitative work drawn out over the course of the last 4 years in terms of engaging the higher education community and getting them to say, well, what is the current state of higher education? What does it look like? And for most people, and this is a direct verbatim quote from a large-scale survey of UK academics, separate to our own work, they talk of the system being broken. They talk of the tyranny of metrics as a distortion and a corruption of what we do as academics and the wider HE community. And then, of course, placing that within the instability and what some may think of as the nefariousness of a largely hostile policy environment in which higher education sits. So I'm going to do a quick look through here in terms of some of the impacts of the current context on the community and the way with which this frames this insertion of these new technologies. And how these new technologies are ostensibly also contributing to some of these conditions within which academic labour and the wider higher education community sits. So the first is this notion of the valorization and the increasing normalization of a productivity mania. If we use the kind of Taylorist metaphor, we're on a production line of endless output, which we are all in some respects committed to. We also sit in a context of increasing staff precarisation, and we've seen that if we look across the UK over the course of the last 3 to 4 years with the extent of industrial action, which has largely been unprecedented and an unprecedented response to the injurious nature of employment conditions within universities and the creeping casualisation of staff. We also find an increasing hyper-competitiveness within the labour market, both for academics and those within professional services dimensions of universities. There are also major problems here in terms of the structural conditions within which universities are operating and a high degree of inequality. And I think this has been especially exposed during the context of the recent pandemic. And when we look at care economy and the unequal burden of care that we've seen in the context of, especially if we look at female academics, and other aspects with regards to gendered inequalities, racial inequalities and the like, and their perseverance within the system. Sadly, folks, we also, as is well documented in a lot of my own survey work, is revealed that an epidemic of other sorts of nefarious behaviours within our system of bullying, of harassment, and of discrimination, which still remain at large. We've also got issues around trust, and we've got, and this is based on other work and papers that are coming out around cultural dissonance within our institutions, a degree of us and them, especially in the context of a rank and file and senior leadership. And we've got widespread concerns around toxic management, especially as relates to attrition of staff within university context, and that being a similar complaint and attribution of blame that is seen across other sectors. Mental health crisis is not going away. It seems, in fact, to be accentuating and has been exacerbated by what I've called and other colleagues have called pandemia, and the experience of the pandemic and how universities have responded to the conditions of the pandemic and going beyond the pandemic. And we see that in terms of some of the invisibilization of health and health-related concerns within universities. And long COVID is a particularly interesting manifestation of the way with which a health crisis is continuing to rear its head, but not perhaps adequately being responded to. I thought it was important to further emphasize that notion of trust and the extent to which we've seen and is well reported an erosion of trust within our communities. And again, referencing this notion, this concept of pandemia, which in large part has been driven by a crisis management mode that has been seen not only during the pandemic, but to survive the pandemic, and a turn away from more democratic forms of governance within our institutions towards more gold command. We're also in the grips of work reorganisation, and we're still trying to find our feet, even though there has been in large ways a snap back to pre-existing forms of work within our institutions, but we're still dealing with, and I know this on a daily basis working in Bristol, with new forms of hybrid working, which are causing all sorts of problems for us and forms of adjustments that we're finding challenging. We cannot possibly, I think, in the UK especially, escape the fact that we are in the midst of a higher education funding crisis, and in the context of a general election year where this just doesn't seem to be on the policy table, this is becoming increasingly problematic and worrying in terms of the way with which the sector goes forward. And the extent to which we might quite genuinely anticipate sector contraction, we might experience institutional failure and insolvency, as the overall capacity of universities to provide for their students in the context of the depreciation of student-based income falls. And they're in the danger, perhaps, of increased stratification within a sector which is already heavily stratified. Then we've also got a problem of attrition. And some of my own work has focused on the extent to which we are seeing workforce attrition within the UK higher education sector, especially where we are witnessing something of a diaspora of UK academics to other international settings. Of course, Brexit hasn't helped in that context. And an overall sense of, are we seeing a kind of fading allure for UK academia? Forgive the UK centrism here. And then a lot of this, of course, wrapped into the fact that when we begin to rationalise higher education, we can rationalise it in the terms of prestige economics. Paul Blackmore has brilliantly talked about this in terms of the prestige economy of higher education and how we orient so much of what we do according to prestige capture. And value also dominated what I've talked about as a notion of competitive accountability, which is a privileging of the rationale of academic labour as the constant acquisition and accumulation of positional goods, principally of funding and of league table rankings and positionality. And yet we've got all this in the context of also being ensnared in the headlights of generative AI and how itself is influencing, as our own work has revealed, the way with which academics and others within UK and international higher education are working. And now it's back to Lawrie to talk about algorithmic conformity. I'll pass the baton.
Thank you. I'll take the baton.
My favorite.
So all of the background that Richard has just given is the background that we were working in when we did our work in trying to identify the behaviours of academics, and some of the things that we saw, we've not put quotes in any of these. I think it's fair to say some of the things that people were telling us, and we thank them for their honesty, were really quite disturbing in how they were using generative AI in their academic work, perhaps in their pastoral work as well, which was very disturbing. And it wasn't just academics, we also engaged with professional services. And I wanted to sort of do a thought experiment with you around this particular area. So what do I mean by algorithmic conformity? We see individuals increasingly relying on algorithms in decision-making and content creation, leading to a uniformity, perhaps, in terms of outputs, but also in outcomes. Generative AI accelerates this process by automating the tasks that we do. We've heard people in our survey, people were telling us that they were thinking alongside the tool. I can tell you now they were thinking on their own and the tool was doing no thinking. But people were talking about using the tool as a colleague, as somebody to bounce ideas off. And I say somebody because that's how it was referred to in the way that they responded. They think of the tool as being a person and they engage with it in that way. And they ask it questions and they start to engage and they start to get answers and they believe that these answers are correct. And we saw a lot of it from academics and professional services staff. So when we start to do that and we start generating this content based on existing patterns and data that these tools have scraped, possibly from people's work in this room, because they just scrape everything, we start to see a richness that is actually generated from your work, but is also reductive because it's only scraping the data that is currently available. It's not generating new ideas. And when it summarizes, there is a tool I probably shouldn't name because I'm on camera. There is a tool that I'm using for doing some analysis that is a wonderful tool in that it allows me to summarize some transcripts of interviews. And when I summarize those transcripts, it gives me a very nice, easy and succinctly put transcript that would take me a long time to do. It's about an hour's worth of transcript, summarize it into 4 or 5 paragraphs. It's great. It removes all the outliers, all the things that were only said in passing once or twice. It removes things that it thinks, well, that's not what's been said generally. So it's reduced down that richness. And I actually need to find those outliers in my research because that's where the interesting things happen. But the generative AI in the tool doesn't do that. So that's what I mean by algorithmic conformity. When we let algorithms decide what our ideas and outputs look like, it leads us to a world where everything is the same. Human creativity is reduced at best, or maybe lost. It pushes us faster into a situation by doing tasks for us and making everything sound alike and squashing unique. We have to redefine what unique is in a world of generative AI. So that's what I mean by algorithmic conformity. And then my own background is around, in part, scenario planning. I like to look 10 to 15 years hence. And so I wanted to think of a world where we got to algorithmic conformity, where it's too late. Now we know that we've got algorithmic conformity, and I wondered how we got here. So we have a proliferation of these tools in academia because we've under pressure, as Richard said, and this is why Richard's work is so important to us. Why are academics using them? Well, they're using them because they're under pressure for productivity and efficiency constantly. And so the tools at first appear as if they can help us overcome that. Metrics is another reason that was given to us. And so this prioritization of quantity of output over quality and the use of AI tools for that is a compelling solution. When you're time poor, somebody said to me at an event yesterday that I love using the tool because I can do something in an hour that would take me half a day. So you become time poor and under pressure, and that's another reason people are using the tools. And we also have this erosion of academic values and practices because of that emphasis on productivity and competition, and people not disclosing that they're using the tools. I'm sure that there are journal editors in the room that have read transcripts and wondered. You know what I mean? You've all read those transcripts, you've all read those things online, and you've just wondered, is this the author or is it a machine? And now today, I was posting on LinkedIn, excited to be coming here, and I noticed for the first time on LinkedIn that it's offering me, would you like to rewrite this with AI? People who use AI can get more engagement. Engagement's a metric, isn't it? And so it's compelling me to use the tool. I didn't use it. I wonder if anybody else has, and I'd love to hear from you if you have used it, what your experience was.
Yep.
You have to pay. I definitely won't be using it. So yeah. And we've also always been, there are people in the room that I've worked with for nearly 30 years. I think they've retired now, but Stephen's still here. But we've worked with a lot. We've seen techno-solutionism since the late 90s. We're always looking for those shiny things. And so those shiny things become a sort of signaler to say, well, maybe this is how we can cope with work intensification. But it actually leads us to more precarity in the sector, and that worries me as well. So what are the implications when we get to this algorithmic conformity? We lose rigor. And it's a contested term, but we do lose it. Quality and authenticity of the work starts to disappear as we start to use more and more AI. When we get more efficient and when we start to use the tools, and I really enjoyed the presentation this morning from the Vice-Chancellor, but the Vice-Chancellor doesn't think they're saving 2 hours on doing that report for me. I'll just leave that 2 hours for them to think of something themselves to do. Yeah. Well, as soon as we start to use these tools and people start saying, well, I've done the workload modeling. Now that you can save 3 hours on doing that report, you can have those 2 hours for research. Doesn't happen. Yeah. You just get a bigger workload. This is what happens. We know that to be true. And the work that you've done, I'm sorry, I just don't think it's as good with the ChatGPT, with any particular large language model. So it doesn't actually lead to more time to do other things. And time is the thing that we always say in academia we need more of, right? When we got the survey results in and we started talking to people and we started looking at them, I really felt for those scholars who were saying that they were thinking with the tool. They were posing questions about their research with the tool and things like that. And it spoke to me of what was happening in the pandemic when it was hard for us to get into rooms together. I've been really fortunate and really privileged. I work with Richard and I work with Donna and half a dozen other people. And we jump on a Zoom or we jump on a Teams and we talk to each other. These are my chat GPT. Yeah. You know, I ask these guys questions and they talk to me about it. Yeah. But I'm not a solo scholar. I don't think I've published anything in the last 5 years as a solo scholar. I like to write and publish and research with other people like Richard and Donna. The tools undermine that as scholars think they can work with the tool and generate the output on their own. And I worry about that as well, because I think it leads to this isolated individual scholar working alone, talking to the tool. And that again leads to a loss of creativity as well. And also isolation is already a problem. Do we need tools to make it worse? And finally, I wanted to say these tools are a privilege. We have access here. At the moment, we're working with South African universities where privileged academics in the universities with access to broadband have got a very different experience of using these tools to the students and staff who are in townships. There is a digital divide. There is a digital divide in the UK. I'm sure we've all seen documentaries about JISC and the fact that these tools aren't accessible to everybody, either because of the bandwidth, the knowledge, or the capacity and capability for them to use it, because we have a digital divide. And I think that these tools exacerbate that. So we still have those problems. And inevitably, we lose academic autonomy. Overdependence on research, content creation. We actually diminish the whole academy by doing this. We devalue it. And as I said, we've seen academics saying they're using bots in a way for Socratic dialogue. I'm having a conversation with the bot. No, you're not. It's a tool. You're not having a conversation. It's just responding. We've already seen adverts. If you scroll through LinkedIn, we've seen people advertising for prompt engineers to work with the tools. People who can craft a question for ChatGPT. Now, this might be an employability skill for graduates at some point, but really, are we really 18 months into these tools being released and we're now saying that we need to appoint prompt engineers? This worries me as well. And this is a particular thing for me, who's somebody who has got a real thing when I trigger when somebody says learning styles. I wonder how long it is before somebody starts publishing machine learning styles. What does that look like? That just sort of worries me a lot. No, I don't want you to do that. And somebody will say, well, what about the good stuff? We're 18 months in to this tool being released to the public. And as academics, you know how long things should really take. And to be honest, how much research has been done into the use of these tools, but we're all there now waving at them and sort of holding them up. And somebody said, well, there's loads of experts on LinkedIn now on AI. And Nana Inni posted this image, and it really made me think about, yeah, if you scroll through LinkedIn now and look through people's profiles, the number of AI gurus that are out there is really disturbing. So yeah, this is where I think we're going. This is what worries me. And I'm going to hand over to Donna now to do the anthropology bit.
Thank you, Lawrie. So I want to talk about humanity. So let's segue a bit from the dystopia that Lawrie has set up for us. That logical progression of what will happen if we insist on stripping out humanity from academic processes. I realize this is my bias from my discipline, but I think we all share this bias in insisting that we center and recenter again people in the systems. Academic systems are human systems. We built these. The values and practices are human. They're created by people, shared by culture and history. The university is an idea and an artifact and a made thing. It's not handed to us. We built it. In these late capitalist times, when extractive logics demand ROI in all things, the narrative of necessary productivity is in tension with human processes of exploration, of knowing, and frequently of not knowing, of sitting there with not quite knowing where to go next. Efficiency shortcuts all of those processes. Academic labor takes time and humanity. We need to recognize and value the human mind in academic labor, very broadly defined. Writing is a process, research is a process, advising is a process, thinking is a process. All of these are processes that are deeply human. This slide is deliberately left blank. Some of what we saw in our research was people thinking that they could sub in GAI tools, as Lawrie said, for the people in these processes. I can generate ideas for writing with. I can work out my train of thought in this article with. I can compose letters of recommendation for my students with. We need to be the voices asking these people, why would you do that? Why, when you could talk to colleagues? Why, when you need to represent, and I have to go down for my notes. Your students, you need to represent your students with your own words, with your thoughts and your feelings. Why, when academic life is the life of the mind, would you outsource the work of your mind to a machine? What's being said about service work, like letters of recommendation, committee reports, or teaching work, like lesson planning and assessment, such that some people in our survey said that they wanted to point LLM tools at this work? If you value the work of giving students feedback, why would you outsource it? If you value the work of writing letters for students, why would you outsource it? If budgets are statements of values, the choices that people are making around these GAI tools are also statements of values. Consider not. I'm going to quote Rebecca Solnit here, who is always quotable. If you don't want to write, then why pretend you are writing? These tools are extrusion machines. If you don't want to paint, then why pretend that you're going to generate a painting? If you do want to do those things, the difficult part where you are bad at it and need to learn how to be better, those things are non-negotiable. Those things take time and mess and failure. That's true no matter where you are in the academic hierarchy or life generally, right? You need to do messy, unsuccessful stuff to get to the point where you do neat, tidy, successful things. And sometimes successful things are neither neat nor tidy nor efficient. Consider asking, why is the perception out there that these tools are useful? What would it take for us to consider saying no? Consider what you're trying to do and whether or not it should be done with people who I know have been hard to come by. I think the trauma and the isolation of the pandemic emergency and the continuing trauma of our pandemic reality, these are things that have isolated us from each other. And these are things that continue to traumatize. If you can't do a thing with people, are these tools really a solution? Or is the solution not something solvable with this kind of tool? If the problem is that people are isolated, the solution is not machine learning. The solution is battling that isolation. If you are outsourcing it, you probably don't value it. Think about what institutions do when they hire adjunct labor to do their teaching. That is a statement about what they think about teaching. I would like for us to have a power analysis of the use of these tools. As my colleagues have said, there are certain people who get access to these tools and certain people who don't get access to these tools. There are people who are going to use these tools and it's going to be excused. And there are people who, when they use these tools, are going to be punished. Think about the rhetoric around students cheating. Think about the panic, in particular, about international students cheating. Some students are going to get the benefit of the doubt more than others. The benefit of the doubt is going to be given predominantly to wealthy, white, cisgendered students. And anybody else is going to be subject to a level of scrutiny that will not serve those students well. When white men get innovator labels for using these tools, the rest of us are not going to be perceived this way. The rest of us are going to be told, well, you probably weren't very good in the first place. That's why you had to use that tool. Are academics cheating in the way so many of us say students are when they use these tools? Or are they innovators? I'd like to cite both the anthropologist Audra Simpson and the theorist Simone Brown on refusal. This idea of refusing to use a thing is not just saying no and then leaving the system in which that tool exists intact. A refusal is rejecting the framework altogether. So it's not just saying, I'm not going to use LLMs for my academic work, but saying, I do not recognize the logics that require me to use LLMs for my academic work. And that's a different piece of work. So we're not ever advocating for a ban of anything. We are advocating for transparency and motivation, and in transparency around how those things work so that people can actually make informed decisions that serve themselves and not just the motivations of the people who are selling the tools to you. This is an image of the Pitt Rivers, for those of you who've been there. The Pitt Rivers is an artifact in and of itself. It's an artifact of a particular Victorian approach to people, to anthropology, and the flaw, one of many, in the Victorian approach to anthropological research was that it constantly mistook the material culture of a people for the people themselves. It reduced people to these display cases and the objects within them. I would beg all of you in this room and online, do not mistake the tool for the humans who made the tool. Do not make the error that so many museums have made in conflating the artifact for the humans who created them. These tools are not currently being used, and I don't think will be used for the common good, but rather for the benefit of institutions and corporations that are uninvested in human labor and the affordances of human connection. We argue in our article and here in this room for the value of human mess, human tentativeness, human unfinished business. Sometimes we don't finish things, and that's okay. We are not the sum of the products that we generate. We don't need to do the work for those who want to reduce us in this way. A parting message, courtesy of a postcard sent to me by a friend. We're all worth more than our productivity. We have references in further reading. The slides will be shared with all of you. So this is our reading list for later. Lawrie, did you want to add any parting words?
Richard.
Thank you very much. And also thank you so much to Richard's team at Chat for facilitating the analysis and the distribution of the survey. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, folks, unfortunately, we'll have to draw the table discussions to a close. And also to note that our online colleagues have been adding quite a lot to the Padlet. You've got the Padlet link in your program as well, so you can have a look at what our online colleagues have been adding to the Padlet. So what we want to do now with this session, and we've got about 10 minutes, so it's going to be a bit of a squeeze, is take comments from the discussions at the tables, and our panel will respond to those. And if I could ask you to sort of repeat the question so it gets onto the online audience effectively. And we're also going to have a look at the questions that have come in through Poll Everywhere. The panel won't get to respond to all of the questions and comments, but they have agreed very kindly to take away the Poll Everywhere questions, to respond to those, to send those to me, and to add them to the blog that they're going to write. So you'll get, as a response to the conference, everybody will get the Padlets, the Poll Everywhere answers, and the blog about the event. So it'll be a pretty rich resource that you'll get following this, which is quite exciting. So over to the floor, really. Has anybody got a comment about the discussion at their table that they'd like to share?
So Sam's talking about information literacy as a major part of what's going on here. So you're talking about literacy around the tool?
Just in general. So yes, there is a concern in the academic space, but actually the biggest concern is the general public that they're taking some of this as gospel. And maybe this isn't the thing, it's the deepfake videos and the upcoming elections that are the most terrifying thing. We saw fake information around COVID and the pandemic, and that was just people speaking stuff. If that now is in this model, which it will be, because it's all straight from the web, and they are asking these questions without the information, without the criticality to question it, which some of them don't, where does that leave us? It's not even our students that I particularly worry about. We can have those conversations with them, which we've never had. The integrity is an issue because we've never had a proper conversation with our students. We never unpick the systemic issues that have driven them to want to use tools to enhance their grade. We've created a monster in that students think they have no room to fail. They have to be the best because that's the system we've created here and globally. There's, you know, so much going on in that space that is terrifying that we can actually get rid of it. If we have that conversation, this shouldn't be an issue. Turn it in shouldn't really need to exist. But it's more the general public. Personally, much more.
Looting of the information landscape with this extruded stuff is a real problem. People using the LLMs as search tools has resulted in the US in people looking for information about how and where to vote for the primary season for a kind of important election. And because it's an extrusion of scrape stuff, it's not actual information. So people were getting the wrong information about where to go to vote. Yeah, tip of the iceberg.
Liz, do you want to comment?
And you guys have a moment too. Thank you. I apologize, but I'm going to be a little bit controversial. And I just want to comment on the neoliberalism and Labour question. And I absolutely get and believe that neoliberalism does causes some significant issues. But I do want to defend senior managers in universities, please. They have to decide the limited resources are going to be spent. So the real problem lies with the way in which it's funded and not the way in which it's run. And those resources have to be spent in such a way that they achieve what the university is set out to do. So in a teaching institution, it's to support student success. And so the metrics that you need to do that, you need them. So you need to know if all your students are failing in a particular module, you need to know that so that you can do something about it. So I just want to make a plea for the importance of some metrics and financial literacy around what happens in institutions as much as anything else. And to put AI into that context, the danger is that a regulatory structure that treats every institution as if they're the same, and that's an algorithmic conformity, if you like, then gets AI imposed on them to manage it in a different way, and that is where the risk is. Thank you. Lawrie.
Just on that, I just want to give a shout out and say metrics are important. For me, not all metrics are valued the same. The one that I am most concerned about, the one that I pay most attention to in any institution is the attainment. And if we measure the attainment gap and we try and address the attainment gap, I think we address learning and teaching for every student. And I think not enough attention is paid to that. It's called, the metric is called the attainment gap, but yes, it's the awarding gap.
Thank you. I don't know if have we got time for, perhaps we should have a look at one of the questions on the board. The one that got voted up the most, the question that got voted up the most is, but if there is some tool, say an AI tool, to help get rid of some of the cumbersome work, like drawing conclusions out of piles of paper, why using AI, which might reduce the cumbersome work, is regarded as not being appropriate? So rather than criticising AI, why embrace our AI to be better able to help us?
I'm going to take that one because I said I could. It goes back to the tool that I talked about earlier when we were looking at the analysis of the transcripts that we've done before. We could have easily abstracted several transcripts into one summary using the tool, using the AI. And I did to experiment with the one that was built in, and I lost all of the outliers and some really interesting one or two things that were said that I would not have got by allowing the AI to be able to pick it up. I missed all of the nuance. I missed the things that were really interesting in favour of the things that were the average thing that was said by the different transcripts. But I know that I'm not criticising the question. I don't view reading those reports as cumbersome. I consider it to be data analysis. I consider reading those transcripts to be the thing that I bring uniquely to my job to be able to do that work. And I don't want to outsource it. I want to understand it. That's my short answer, is that, yeah, that's the job.
Okay, I'll say something. Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's an opportunity for a real proposal of what is compass, and should we just write it off, as Lawrie says, as something that's redundant, or does it formally take all part of what we do, what we learn, and how we develop? So I think a simple sense of kind of subtracting that and then delegating what could be seen as onerous to technology is in part misguided. I think there's another dimension, so we make this observation in the paper, which is also about redundancy, and how much redundancy there already is within the sector in terms of what we do, and the extent to which technology provides a vehicle for elucidating. So that's the kind of follow-on.
I mean, I think the idea that there's a bunch of busy work that this is going to help us do requires us to interrogate the notion of what is busy work, right? Busy work for who? Cumbersome for who? Some stuff that's hard and takes time is work worth doing. Some stuff that's hard and takes time is kind of bullshit. But depending on who you are and what your priorities are, you really need to think carefully about, is it actually a waste of time, or is it just something that takes a lot out of you? And maybe you need more people to do it, and maybe it's important work. I worry a lot about things like work on behalf of students getting framed as, that's a lot of work. But why are we here if we're not going to do this as people? If we're going to outsource that kind of care work to a tool, why are we here if we're going to do this?
Donna, I think we'll end the session on that profound question. Why are we here?